Please submit questions as you think of them into the Q&A box. We will answer them after the conclusion of our presentation. My name is Nasli Kirkchin, and I am the Coordinator of Disability, Diversity, and Non-Traditional Student Services at SUNY Administration, which is like our headquarters for the SUNY system. Prior to my role at SUNY, I worked in the Services for Students with Disabilities office at Binghamton University, one of our SUNY schools. Joe and Lauren, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Joe Plutz. I'm the Director of Disability Services at the Fashion Institute of Technology in Manhattan. I've been working in disability services for the past 13 years, and I guess that's about it.
Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Lauren Rodriguez. I'm the Director of the Office of Disability Resources at Purchase College. We're a SUNY college in Westchester County, right outside of New York City. I've been working in disability services in higher education for about 8 years. My degree's in school psychology, and I also worked in a K-12 system as a school psychologist for 3 years prior to joining Purchase as the director.
Thank you all. I'd just like to share some brief facts with you before we get into the meat of the presentation. The National Center for Education Statistics shows that 19% of college students self-identify as a student with a disability at a college or university. Please note that this doesn't take into account the students with disabilities who do not disclose. These are the students who have gone to the Disability Support Services offices and have disclosed themselves and requested accommodations. SUNY serves the largest number of self-identified college students with disabilities in New York State. We serve over 30,000 students with disabilities, or 43% of all college students enrolled in New York. At SUNY, we serve many students with disabilities, and the disability categories reflected on this slide in the pie chart are the categories that the New York State Education Department requires us to follow. So we serve students with neurodevelopmental disabilities, which is the largest category of students that we serve. And this includes students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and students on the autism spectrum. We serve students with mental health disabilities, sensory disabilities, chronic health conditions, students with multiple disabilities, and many more. So as you can see, a pretty sizable amount of students that we serve have invisible or hidden disabilities.
So what we wanted to share with you was to start off by explaining the differences between high school and college to make sure students entering the college setting have a better understanding of the expectations. So first, we're going to talk about the legal rights of students with disabilities. So in the college setting, the laws shift, and so when we are working with students with disabilities and we're inquiring about how to provide equal access to their non-disabled peers. So the laws that are governing our work at the college setting is really about equal access and making sure we're not discriminating against students. And so in the high school setting, an example is students might have some modifications to their programs or their curriculum, whereas in the college setting, there's no specific fundamental modifications to our academic, technical, or behavioral standards. So we might make adjustments such as talking to students about barriers they're experiencing and providing testing accommodations, or for an example, possibly support with note taking in the classroom setting, but we're not modifying any curriculum or making any fundamental altercations. So in college, education is not a right, so students must meet the same admission criteria as their peers. And then what's really important to note is in the high school setting where students with disabilities might have received modification to the school's behavioral code, possibly through a manifestation determination meeting. In the college setting, all students are expected to abide by the college's code of conduct, regardless of disability. So students say if they have to meet with the office that oversees the college's code of conduct, they can request accommodations for the process, such as possibly requesting a note taker would be an example of maybe the meeting that they have to attend, but they can't say, well, I have ADHD, and therefore my impulse control is impacted, and that's why I had this behavior. This is why I broke the college's code of conduct. Therefore, I should not be responsible for my behavior. That's very different at the college setting. And then there's a differentiation in responsibilities for students. So overall, the theme here really is the emphasis is on the student, and they are responsible for seeking support and services and following through with the office's policies and procedures. So for example, at the college setting, students must self-identify with the appropriate campus office. And they must also follow through. So just because a student might submit documentation to the office, that doesn't mean that they just receive the accommodations. They have to follow through with the process, which is likely to meet with someone in the office to discuss their request further. Students must identify their needs and request services, whereas in high school, the school district is really responsible for developing IEPs or 504 plans and scheduling meetings to maybe make modifications. At the college level, if a student requires additional accommodations at any time during their career, they would be responsible for working with the office and making the request. In the college setting, students are responsible for providing documentation to the office. So whether that might be obtaining an outside evaluation or getting updated medical information from their physician or whomever is providing treatment, like a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Whereas in the school district, they provide free evaluations. Also, what's important to note is students are required to self-advocate for themselves and seek support from the office. Accommodations are not retroactive. So it's really important as a student that even though if you're not sure that you might utilize your accommodations at the college setting, to set them up before you even come to campus, and start using them. And then if you decide, hey, maybe I don't think I need this for this specific class, that's totally fine, but you can't go back and retroactively say, well, I didn't have my accommodations set up, so that's why I performed poorly on a test and I should get a second chance. That doesn't happen in the college setting. And then the other piece of it along the theme is that we work directly with students, so parents always have the opportunity to call our offices and inquire about policies and procedures, but when it comes to requesting accommodations or following through on specific requests, it would be the student working with the office directly.
Hi, this is Joe from FIT. We just wanted to cover some of the background and the differences between high school and college and what the different laws are that regulate both of those. But now once the student gets accepted to a school and wants to look for services, what is the Disability Services Office role on campus? Well, over the course of the years, the purpose and I guess the role of the Disability Services Office has changed. Primarily, when these offices first started, they were pretty much approving accommodations for students. So what the students would do, they would register with the office, they would get their accommodations, and then we'd work with the students as they get their accommodations. But over the course of several years, more and more offices are being able to expand some of the staff. And so we're able to now advocate more for students on campus. And also we work closely, very closely with faculty on campus because we want to make sure that they have an understanding of what it is the accommodations are, why they're getting them, and making sure that they're able to accommodate those students in the class. When I talk about advocating for equal access, we know that students have gone through a lot of frustrating times through their education process. They've been stigmatized, they've been stereotyped. So we want to make sure that when they get to campus, they're not feeling or having those same issues that they've had in either the grade school or the high school level. So as I said, we do workshops, we do presentations on campus, we meet with faculty and staff, other areas on campus to make sure that students with disabilities are heard, and also that there's an understanding of what the accommodations are. Can we go to the next slide? So when we talk about accommodations, we have to look at the grand picture of everything. We want to know the student's disability, and we want to know how that disability impacts the student's participation in their classroom. Because remember, as Lauren had mentioned, the purpose of accommodations on campus are not to provide success for students on campus. They're really to provide access, an equal playing field for the students to be able to participate on campus. They're also assigned for the purpose of assuring that the student is not subject to any discrimination on the basis of their disability. Again, the accommodations are there to help level the playing field, making sure that there's not any discrimination within the classroom, and we can make sure that there's complete access. One thing to keep in mind of what an accommodation is not, and is not a guarantee of success. So as many students have experience in either grade school or high school with their 504 or an IEP, those pretty much guarantee success as long as you meet the criteria, you can be successful. That's not what happens at the college level. As Lauren mentioned, all the academic requirements are required of everybody, disability or not. So participation in the class, attending classes, taking notes, taking exams, doing projects, doing presentations, all of those are required of any student attending classes at the college level, disability or not. And then also, as Lauren mentioned as well, the reasonable accommodation should not fundamentally alter the nature of the program, the course, or service activity and/or practices and policies. As I mentioned, all students have to meet the same academic requirements. There are no course waivers, course substitutions at the college level as there may have been in high school. So what are the different types of accommodations? Lauren touched on some of these. There are certain academic accommodations, but also at the college level, there's several types of non-academic accommodations as well. Some of the academic adjustments that we see for students are modification of exam administration. Typically, that could be extra time for exams. It could also be taking an exam in a quiet environment outside of the classroom. Also, there's note-taking assistance. There's many new types of technology that can help students with note-taking, as well as, peer note-takers as well are an option, but we've found that there's more technology available today for students, which is much more accurate, and they're able to get their notes in a more reasonable amount of time. There's accessible formats of printed material or web-based material. For students with hearing impairments, there's interpreting services or captioning services. There's modifications to policies such as attendance. If there's issues with a student attending a class due to their disability, there could be a possibility of flexible attendance. This one is a little tricky in that we have to work very closely with the faculty members to make sure that the student this is not a carte blanche where they can miss as many classes as they feel they need. Attendance and participation is still an important part of attending college courses. So we want to make sure that everyone understands what the flexible attendance accommodation means and how that's to be implemented. And it could be implemented differently in each class, depending on what types of class it is. If it's a lecture class, it may, and conversation class, it may be more important for the student to be there. If it's a project-based class where they're working in a lab, maybe not so much. So again, it's a matter of working with the instructors to make sure we get that information and everyone's on the same page when the accommodation is set up. And then course substitutions. We do not, at the college level, typically, well, let me take that back. There are no course waivers on college campuses. There is a possibility for a course substitution. Sometimes that's related to a foreign language, if there's a language-based learning disability, but there are no course waivers. So any requirement that's needed to meet the requirements of the major, the student must take those courses. And then some non-academic accommodations. We're looking at if there's residence halls on the college campuses, there's a possibility of an animal or an emotional support animal on campus, and also dietary access for the dining services or other areas on campus where food is being served. So we have to look at those other non-academic types of accommodations as well. And actually, I have to say that over the course of the time that I've been working in this field, we've seen, if you asked 10 years ago about emotional support animals, nobody would have known what you were talking about. But we see more and more of those cases coming through, as well as a lot of housing accommodation requests with students looking for single rooms, or in the case of dietary restrictions, needing a room that has a kitchen.
Okay, great. So a lot of questions that we get at our admissions events come from documentation questions. So we just want to make clear that every office or every campus might have different requirements for documentation. It does vary, but what we're going to go over now when we speak about documentation are the guidelines that have come out from the Association on Higher Education and Disability. So when our office is working with a student regarding an accommodation request, we are really setting up a meeting with them. And in that meeting, we're really looking at the student self-report. So as a student, when students are scheduling a meeting, we make it clear that the expectation is for students to come in and have an understanding of their disability, as well as the barriers that they experience because of it. And when I'm meeting with students, you know, I just make sure that when we start the meeting to have them in their own words explain their disability and maybe what their history of accommodations was in high school or at their previous institution if they're a transfer student. And it's totally fine what their understanding is at that time. You know, as the professionals in the office, we're really trained to ask like questions to get a better understanding of the barriers that exist, as well as like what accommodations they might need in the college setting. So the primary source of information that we're really getting information from is the student and their self-report. We also, you know, make decisions based on observation and our interactions with the student, as well as any outside documentation that was submitted. So information from high school or external or third parties like medical physicians, etc. So documentation, you really want to make sure that it establishes a disability and also indicates how that disability or diagnosis may impact the student in the setting, whether that be, like Joe said, the academic setting or housing or dietary. So it's just really important that the student has a good understanding prior to meeting with the office, what their barriers might be so that they can articulate that. If you're coming from the high school setting, we always recommend to students if you had an IEP and you have a psychological evaluation, submit as much as information as you can get from your high school, because at the college setting, we will hold on to your documentation and anything related to the office for up to 7 years after you leave. So after you graduate from our college, or if you transfer, say you want to take the GREs and you require accommodations at that level, we would have like a clear record and we could provide support for your accommodation requests. So I always tell students to just try to submit as much as information as possible, but you know, we don't want it to be a burden on you either, so we understand. When it comes to a 504 plan, you can definitely submit that as a form of documentation. My experience has been with 504 plans, and maybe Joe can chime in if he wants to, they oftentimes don't speak a lot about the barriers that the student is experiencing. So sometimes it might be helpful depending on your diagnosis, and it's totally up to you. You might have more information that you could provide maybe from a psychologist or medical, you know, an outside treatment provider to submit along with your 504, which oftentimes really just lists maybe your diagnosis and then a short list of accommodations. That's been my experience at the college level with 504 plans.
Yeah, and Lauren, I just want to add, if I may, that there's no one specific answer that we can provide about documentation. It does vary from school to school. And I think it's the matter of contacting the disability services offices at the schools that your student or son or daughter may be interested in going to, and finding out what their documentation requirements are. I'm sure there's information on each school's website. I know all the SUNY schools have that, but what documentation requirements they have. It's basically going to be the same types of questions, but it just may be a specific form or some other way that they need it presented. So I think that it's important that you reach out to the schools that you're interested in going to.
Yeah. A lot of times too on websites, we have a couple forms because we get a lot of questions like, oh, I have a psychologist. They want to submit something to confirm a diagnosis, but we're not sure what. So we have created a couple forms just to help guide the treatment providers so that we're not going back and forth about what information we need. Also, sometimes especially when it comes to housing, or maybe like new accommodation requests, or we sometimes ask the student for consent to talk to their treatment provider, to follow up on just some specific questions to get more of their perspective from that individual who's working directly with the student. So that's another option as well.
Before I get started on this, the college readiness and some critical skills students need to have, I did want to mention as well that students need to understand that in most cases, just by registering with the Disability Services Office does not mean, as in when they were in high school, that every one of their instructors knows about their disability. Everyone's going to know that they're registered with the office. It's kept confidential up until the point that the student decides that they want to take advantage of the accommodations that they've been approved for. So no emails get sent, no information gets sent to faculty members or staff or administrators unless the student gives us the okay to do that. I just want that to be clear because oftentimes it takes students quite a while to come to register with the Disability Services Office because they feel that everyone's going to know about their disability just by registering or providing documentation, and that's just not the case. So when it comes to some of the other things that we find out with students when they get to college is that they're oftentimes not ready for this new type of learning environment. They're often in high school, they're going to classes every day, they're seeing their same instructors, they're getting information reinforced every day by their same instructors. At the college level, it's different. So really being able to set up time management skills, a lot of executive functioning skills. I'm sorry, there's a siren in the background. Executive functioning skills. Sorry about that. So yeah, time management, study skills, being able to self-advocate for themselves. Even as I said, just coming to the Disability Services Office to register is a step that they need to take, and be able to do that once they get to college. Because until they get that information, until they find out what the resources are, it's going to be challenging for them. Also, if they're living in the residence halls, just some daily living skills, doing laundry, cleaning the room, vacuuming, going to the dining hall to eat. So there's a lot of things that we find that students coming to college are not necessarily prepared for. And a lot of Disability Services Office can help with some of this, but it's not specifically a part of what the office function is, but they can possibly direct you with some other resources on campus that can help them with some of these with some of these life skills and other things that they need to know. Because as I said, their classes are now going to be meeting once a week, and if it's a student that's struggling in a math class but they're working on a project in some other class that they're more interested in, they're going to start putting off of that math class until it may be too late. So really being able to organize and manage time and get an understanding of being able to study. Many offices, many schools offer free tutoring services for students as well, so that they take advantage of those opportunities to get help in the classes that they may be struggling in.
This is Nasli. So in college, students will be largely expected to use assistive technology, alternate accessible electronic formats, and other auxiliary aids and services to meaningfully and independently navigate their coursework. And so, for example, if you've ever had course materials or exams read aloud to you in college, you'll use software that will read it out loud to you instead. And perhaps some of you already have experience with that. We find that students coming in from the high schools have very diverse experiences with different assistive technologies. Students who are blind or have vision impairments may already have experiences with screen reader software or magnification software. For students with hearing impairments, our accommodations may include closed captioning or live captioning, transcripts, and of course, sign language interpreting services. For individuals with motor and physical impairments, they may use speech-to-text software or voice recognition software where you speak into the computer and the text appears, or perhaps they use alternative devices such as like a mouth stick or a head wand or trackball mouse to navigate the computer and digital content. And of course, for our largest population that we serve, the students with learning disabilities, nearly all of the offices have some kind of literacy software or text-to-speech software that helps with writing skills and reading skills. And this is also beneficial for students who may have difficulty holding a book or turning the pages. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons why one would use a read aloud kind of software. And then there's also all kinds of time management apps and mindfulness apps for anxiety and things like that. And so these are some examples on the screen of what colleges offer. And this is something you might want to ask the individual campus office what they have. And of course, they will provide training for you. In terms of
the one thing I wanted to add to that was also that many, oftentimes students have human readers for their exams. They need their exam read aloud. And at the college level, as Nasli was talking about, there's a lot of technology for screen reading software that's very efficient. So it's a matter of us informing the students of this, but also training them on how to use the software. Typically, there's a little fight back with having to use technology, but once they find out how to use it and that it's available, they can use it not only for their exams, but also for anything else that they're using electronically on their computers.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, we're really preparing you to complete your educational pursuits, but also for your independence once you leave our institutions. And so, you know, using technology is really helping you in the long run, because when you leave, you'll still be able to have different, you know, mechanisms in the workplace or however else you choose to pursue your life after college. So when thinking about applying to college, these are some of the things that parents and students and guidance counselors ask us about. You know, it's not required for students to disclose a disability on the application. That is a totally personal decision. And, you know, disclosing on an application for an essay is completely optional. You don't need to, but some students may wish to talk about it in a college essay to demonstrate, you know, their story and their strengths and resilience that they've experienced. As Joe mentioned before, we don't permit course waivers, but there are some instances where a substitution, such as for a foreign language or a math-related learning disability, may be appropriate. Most colleges do require math and foreign language general education courses, and some majors require it as well. So if that's something that's really important to you, definitely look into that for the major that you're interested in and the campus, and see what kind of policies they may have to permit substitutions. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, yeah, and do that, as Nasli was saying, just do that sooner than later, because I've seen oftentimes students wait until their last 2 semesters to take their foreign language requirement, and then they have to go through the approval process, and if it's not approved, then they're stuck taking other classes. And so it's just making sure that you take the steps that you need to well ahead of time, so you can make sure that if there is going to be a substitution for a foreign language or whatever course, then that gets taken care of earlier on.
Absolutely. And, you know, with respect to placement exams, a good number of community colleges and some of our four-year institutions require or administer placement exams in order to accurately place you in courses such as math and English. And so, you know, if you are planning to go to a community college or one of those four-year institutions that has placement exams, make sure that you request accommodations for the placement testing, and, you know, find out where they're offered and what's available.
Yeah, at FIT that we have placement exams, because we accept SAT or ACT scores, but if a student does not take either the SAT or the ACT, they can take the placement test. However, they're not eligible to register for a math or English course until that placement test is taken. So sometimes students will need to take that over the summer if they have to take want to take those courses in the fall semester. So it's important, again, to reach out to the Disability Services Office to find out when the student can take the placement test, because if they need accommodations, again, we want to make sure that they register sooner than later.
With respect to campus visits, it's not essential, but it's something that might be important for you, particularly if you have a disability which requires, you know, using a wheelchair or navigating with other kinds of adaptive technology. And so you might want to consider getting geographically oriented and really better understanding what the transportation options are available, because some of our campuses are located in remote areas, others are very hilly. And so, you know, just keeping that in mind as you select a campus as well, that might be very important to you. As we mentioned before, you want to check the individual campus office to see what their documentation requirements are and what their assistive technology availability may be. Some campuses offer transition programs where they invite high school students to the campus to show them what it's like to be in the life of a college student with a disability. Other campuses have transition programs for students who are already accepted, and so it's kind of like an orientation for registered students with disabilities to help jumpstart them and get them used to using the services and training on technology and things like that. We also have a number of specialized programs offered on different SUNY campuses that support the unique needs of students on the autism spectrum. And we also have some non-credit and credit-bearing programs for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I won't go into too much detail about those programs, but if you have any questions about them, please feel free to ask, at the end or after this is over. And like Joe mentioned, things like counseling or academic coaching or tutoring, these are things that are not necessarily offered by the Disability Services Office, but may be offered by another office on campus. Many campuses do have counseling services for mental health and wellness, but not all of them do. And so if this is something that's really important to you, you should look into that as well. Joe and Lauren, do you have anything else to add on this?
No.
No,
Okay.
I'm good. I think you covered everything.
I guess before I move on to the next slide, I will say one more thing in terms of transferring. If you are planning to transfer from a 2-year college to a 4-year college or to graduate school, again, keep all of these considerations in mind as you go from one campus to another. The requirements or the offerings may differ. And so, you want to really do your research before doing that. So in terms of financial aid and external supports, there are numerous scholarships and awards programs specific to supporting the needs of students with disabilities. We are not financial aid experts. We're just providing this to you so that you know that there are some tuition assistance programs and considerations for students with disabilities seeking the Excelsior Scholarship. Additionally, we have specialized programs like the Educational Opportunity Program, and TRIO grants are available on different offices. HEOP is a private school program version of the EOP, so you can ignore that. And the EOP programs and TRIO programs actually have built in a lot of those really strong support services such as tutoring and things like that. And of course, if you're not familiar already, there's various state agencies for which you may be eligible to receive their services, such as Adult and Continuing Education Services, or Access VR, and the New York State Commission for the Blind. And various trade centers which may support you in getting assistive technology or the training you need to use the assistive technology. And there may even be scholarships specifically for students with disabilities at the individual schools. So if you have additional questions about these, definitely contact the individual campus financial aid office or the Higher Education Services Corporation.
All right, so just briefly, one of the questions asked in the chat, which I think is a great one, is how does the Accessibility Resources Department maybe differ from disability services? So great question. The confusing thing at the college level is the office that a student with a disability would need to identify with. We all have different names, and so that's a little bit confusing. So for example, my office name is Office of Disability Resources. Another campus might be Accessibility Resources, Accessibility Services, or whatnot. So my general suggestion is whatever campus website you're visiting, maybe just type in disability in the search bar, and that's generally how I'm successful in finding the appropriate office. So getting started with the campus disability services. So once you commit, the students should really look into what the process is on that campus and plan to make an early request for an accommodations. We even talked about before, you know, as you're looking at different college campuses, please look at the websites and the information that's provided. And if you have questions, definitely give us a call. We get calls all the time from prospective students, and we would way rather talk to you far in advance. And in general, we can't guarantee accommodations, but we can generally give you an idea. And I think when you call the office, you'll get an idea of what working with the office is like. Make sure, like I said before, get copies of your most recent psychological evaluation or any other documentation that states your impairment and how it affects you in living or the learning environments. And so, you know, we understand with what's going on right now in the pandemic, our incoming students, they might not have access to their documentation as readily. Our campus and our website, we always say, do not delay requesting accommodations just because you do not have access to your documentation at that time. We meet with students, you know, and get their self-report and their accommodation requests and discuss the barriers without having documentation, and that's totally okay. So please don't wait just because your high school has maybe delayed or it's been difficult to get in contact with them to submit your documentation. We want to make sure that students are reviewing what accommodations they've used in the past and the effectiveness, and make sure you follow any processes or procedures that the disability office you know, gives to you regarding how to initiate a request for specific accommodations. So for example, if you're approved for audiobooks, we will approve you for that accommodation, but then we have a process that you have to follow to submit what audiobooks you need. So we will fulfill those requests, but the student has to follow the process, or if they're having difficulty with a component of it, they have to come to the office to advocate for themselves and request support with whatever they need to fulfill the request. And so that's just an example for that.
I would just add, you know, that a lot of the offices operate very similarly, and a lot of the processes are very similar. And so it just may differ in that some campuses are, they might have electronic systems for you to complete, you know, a lot of this information, whereas others are more face-to-face, you know, paper-based kind of transactions. So I just want to make sure you understand that it really looks similar across most of our campuses. It's just how to actually get started might be just a tiny bit different depending on where you go. These are some additional resources that might be helpful for you. On the SUNY Disability Services webpage, you'll see that same chart that we shared earlier on in the presentation about the differences between high school and college. And we also have a list of all the Disability Services Office's contact information across the 64 SUNY campuses. And then there's some additional resources on this slide for you. The Think College website is primarily for learners with intellectual and developmental disabilities looking for programs to support their needs. Transition Source is a really great statewide resource that covers educational entities, state agencies, and lots of different kinds of independent living centers and everything. So the Transition Source is a huge resource available to you. And I think we can start taking questions if they're in the chat.
They are. Can you see it?
I cannot.
Okay.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
I mean, I can read some of them. So does a neuropsychological evaluation that was completed when a child was 16 still count as documentation for college accommodations and extra time on tests, or do you have to get a new evaluation? I can answer on my campus that that would be a form of documentation that someone should definitely submit. We would not require a new total evaluation unless there was a component that didn't make sense related to the accommodation request, but I haven't run into that.
What I will add to that, Lauren, is, you know, depending on the kind of program you're going into, so if you're going into nursing, or if you're pre-med, or if you're looking into law school and you know you're going to graduate school, those exams, like the GRE or the nursing exams, they may require the most recent documentation in order to receive accommodations. So if you're pursuing some of those advanced professions that have licensure or advanced degrees, that may be a good thing to get the most recent documentation. But otherwise, as Lauren said, most of our campuses will work with you on that.
The next question is, does someone with an IEP have to take full credits, or can they take a lesser load? So we have students who might decide to enroll on a part-time status. Full-time status would be 12 credits or more, but possibly because of their disability and the barriers, they might not be able to take 12 credits. And so if the student wanted to maybe live in campus housing, and you have to be full-time in order to qualify for campus housing, a student could request an accommodation through the office to be considered full-time status.
And one thing to be careful with that is reach out to the financial aid office, because students are required to be taking a minimum of 12 credits to receive financial aid. So follow up with financial aid office to see what's available through them as well.
Yeah, Neslie, do you want to speak to, do all the SUNY schools have healthcare psychiatrists?
So the answer is no. The short answer is no. Many of our campuses do have health services offerings, but the degree to which they offer health and counseling vary. We do have some campuses with psychiatrists on staff, but that is something that you'd need to look into for each campus.
Yeah, FIT does have a staff psychiatrist that's in once a week, but we do not accept documentation for our office through the school's psychiatrist. It has to be from an outside medical professional.
How do colleges work with students who may have a leave of absence for medical reasons? At least on our campus, we have a leave of absence policy, and you might take that via health services route or via the counseling center for maybe mental health. There's very specific guidelines if you take a leave, at what point you might get your tuition or any reimbursement. So you should definitely, our policies outlined on our website, and you should be aware of the financial implication if you were to take a leave mid-semester or whatnot. If a student signed a FERPA release to include a parent, can the parent advocate for them at that time, or is it still the student's responsibility? So I can speak from our office. We will speak to parents if there's a FERPA waiver signed, but anything like an accommodation request, that needs to come directly from the student, along with following the process, which might be scheduling a meeting to discuss barriers. The students are responsible for following the policies and procedures and whatnot.
Yeah, and just to echo what Neslie had said earlier about this is a transition that they're making from high school to college, but we're trying to prepare them for the college to the workforce or college to graduate school. So having them advocate for themselves, meet with the offices, set up their appointments, I think is an important step for the students to understand. But I agree with I agree with Lauren that we do and will meet with parents if the the FERPA form is signed, and we can meet with them at any time.
Someone had also asked about exit summaries, if that counts as documentation. My advice, exit summaries often, when I receive them, they honestly don't say a lot. So when I've done presentations in other areas, you can definitely submit an exit summary, but my experience has been that it doesn't really thoroughly discuss the barrier that the student had, experienced in the high school setting, I would way rather have a copy of their IEP from 11th or 12th grade that discussed, what goals they were working on and why. So I don't know, Joe, do you have?
No, sorry, I don't have anything to add.
Okay. I'm just trying to look at, they want to know if we'll be providing a copy of slides or a recording after.
I'm happy to provide a copy of the slides. Do you guys plan on providing the recording on your website, Sherry and Tim?
We can email them the recording as well.
Great.
Someone wanted to know what documentation is needed for mental health disability that affects concentration. Is the psychiatrist note sufficient as documentation, or do you need a neuropsych eval? My answer is we have a form that the psychiatrist could fill out. Oftentimes psychiatrists write not much in a note, so we have a form that's helpful, and it talks about what the diagnoses are, but also how it impacts their daily living skills. So I think our form would provide the information that we would need rather than going out and getting a whole evaluation.
Yeah, we have a similar form at FIT, and it really asks the questions that we need the answers to. What we found in the past is we were getting information from a psychiatrist or a social worker or whomever the student was working with, and it wasn't giving us the complete information. So we came up with a form that you can provide to your medical provider, and they can answer all the questions right on this form, and it gives us the information we need, and it gives us the opportunity then to set up the accommodations.
I also don't know if we said this earlier in the presentation, but it's probably important to note that just because a medical provider or psychologist says that, a student would benefit from something does not necessarily mean that the college has to grant it. I think that is a common misunderstanding or misconception that, just because a medical professional has said that this is something that would support your benefit to access the living and learning environment. There's a lot of considerations that need to be made pertaining to the reasonableness of the request and, whether or not it would fundamentally alter our policies or environments. And so I just want to make sure, folks are aware that just because a doctor says so doesn't mean necessarily that we will say yes. So.
And the same thing with what's on, their high school 504 or IEP, that just because an accommodation is listed on there doesn't necessarily it's going to mean it will transfer over to the college environment.
There was another question about in the current COVID environment, especially if it continues in the fall, how would a student utilize their accommodation for having tests read out loud? And so my answer would be we have provided students technology that they can use on their personal devices for text-to-speech that would read the test out loud to them. How do students get accommodations for the placement tests for SUNY community colleges? Do you know that, Nasli? Or Joe?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
How do students get accommodations for the placement tests for community colleges?
Yeah, so it's really a matter of, it depends on when the student is going to be taking the test. But if they want to take it prior to their admittance for the fall semester, they need to reach out to the school that they're interested in over the summer or sooner than later, so that can be established, and then they can schedule those exams. Really, they can schedule that placement exam typically, at least at FIT, at any time during the course of their time at the school, but they have to take it before they can register for a math or an English class. So oftentimes they want to take it sooner than later. So taking it over the summer happens frequently.
Someone wanted to know about fundamental modifications. And so my example that I explain to students are, say, for example, a student requests attendance modification as an accommodation. And as a disability office, we determine that there is a barrier related to attending classes. Well, on our campus at Purchase, we have some programs where attendance is critical, such as dance. We have a dance program, or like acting. So we might, as an office, determine that attendance modification might be approved, but then from there we consult with each faculty member to determine if it's reasonable in that course, and we go through very specific questions, and sometimes it's not reasonable for the class, and it's determined that modification of the attendance policy would be a fundamental alteration for that specific class and would not be approved. Someone wants to know, is extended time an accommodation students can receive? Can professors refuse to allow extra time, for example? So extra time on tests is a possible accommodation, and no, professors cannot refuse extra time. There are different policies and procedures and compliance-based offices that the student could work with if a faculty member were not allowing the students their approved accommodations from the office.
Yeah, I would say that this is where the Disability Services Office may intervene and work with the faculty member to ensure their understanding of the accommodations and why they're appropriate, and so that you wouldn't have to necessarily do that yourself.
Right.
I think one of the additional things to that is extra time to like finish projects or extra time on assignments as opposed to specifically on an exam. That one's a little bit more challenging because oftentimes we run into what we mentioned earlier about executive functioning, time management, and organizational skills. And that's usually what the interference is when students are needing extra time to finish their assignments or projects. So getting assistance with that can be helpful in getting them back on track to finish their projects and assignments on time.
Someone asked about audiobooks, and we do provide audiobooks if it's an approved accommodation. Interpreting services might be like American Sign Language interpreting. That was a question. Would you accept a student's 504 from high school if there is no testing with adult norms? I would accept the 504 plan, but like I said earlier in the presentation, oftentimes the 504 plans we get in our office are less than 2 pages, so they really don't provide much information. Most of the time students have some kind of diagnosis, such as ADHD or maybe a chronic medical condition, that we could get most of the information we require likely from their off-campus treatment provider.
Yeah, Lauren, I agree with that. And the 504s really don't have a lot of the information that we need. So again, reaching out to the school or to the disability department that your student may be interested in going to, showing them the documentation and getting their feedback on it. And they'll tell you whether it's acceptable or not.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good one. If a student has been approved for accommodations like extra time or different location for testing, do they have to use them in every class for every test, or can the student pick and choose? So the student has the right to pick and choose their accommodations if they use them. They have the right to pick and choose, you know, if they notify all their faculty of their accommodations or maybe just a specific class. And then the student is responsible, if there is a test and they want to use their testing accommodations, to follow the policies and procedures on how to set up to take that test with their accommodations. So it's up to them. Do you have any students on the autism spectrum who need support with daily living skills and has a support worker who helps them, for example, with navigating around campus or attends class with them? We do have students on the spectrum who require support. Sometimes students might have a personal care attendant approved as an accommodation. That could be in the classroom or that could be in housing. There are very specific guidelines related to what they might be approved to do in those settings. The accommodation is for the student to have the personal care attendant in whatever environment that it's approved for, but the personal care attendant, the actual service of that is not the school's responsibility. So colleges don't pay for like aid services like they do in high school.
There's a question there about going through the process and timeline when it comes to a student registering with the Disability Services Office and the start of accommodations. So as we talked before, I mean, starting the process sooner than later is always a benefit. But understand that even though a student may be accepted to the college and maybe even has registered for their classes, they haven't had the exposure yet to the class. They don't know what the makeup is. You know, it's their first semester at the school. So I think oftentimes we, one, ask them to come in probably around August to meet with one of the counselors in our office to discuss the accommodations, and then maybe even going to the first week of classes to see what the class is like. Does it have a lot of lecture notes? Is it more project-based? Are there a lot of exams? So there's a lot of things the student doesn't know about, and maybe we don't know what accommodations to set up for those classes until the student has the exposure and maybe has the course syllabus.
Another question, is there a grading curve or safety net for students with IEPs? So the answer would be no. We would provide accommodations to make sure that student has equal access, but the student is responsible for learning the course content and performing and receiving grades.
I see a couple of questions on here related to issues with the COVID-19 issues and getting documentations and providing it to the school. Lauren, how are you handling that right now?
We have an online system, and we haven't run into students indicating that they have had difficulty yet, but we would do what we've always been doing, and we meet with students without documentation. We rely on student self-report, so practicing your self-report and really getting a good understanding, maybe working with your parents or guardian to really talk over what types of support you received in high school. And then we sometimes approve accommodations without documentation. It really depends on the accommodation requested and what the student is reporting as their barriers.
Yeah, and I think that's important to understand with the current situation that we're in, that I think a lot of schools are a little bit more lenient when it comes to the documentation, understanding that it may be difficult to meet with a doctor or get it from their school. So I think, again, working with the Disability Services Office and asking them those questions specifically, but I think you'll find that they'll be a little bit more lenient at this point. But going forward, they're probably, you know, they're going to request it at some point or request some current documentation.
Someone wanted to know more about specialized programs for individuals with autism. So at Purchase College, we have a fee-based program for students on the spectrum. It goes above and beyond legislative mandates. It's called the Cornerstone Program, and it's outlined on our website if you have additional information. And there's also some resources out there we can find across the United States where there might be specialized programs for students on the spectrum. Nasli, do you have any more information?
Yeah, I know SUNY New Paltz has a program as well, and Binghamton University has pretty extensive supports, and other campuses may as well that just haven't, you know, formally put them on their website, but feel free to contact me and I can share more.
There's a question here about needing to, oh, wait a minute, I just lost it, sorry. Oh, about how, if a student tried to go without their accommodations their first semester, but found they wanted them for the second semester, when should they see you? Yeah, students can register with the Disability Services at any point, but keeping in mind that the accommodations are not retroactive to at any point prior to when they register. So if they're finding that they're struggling or need the help, it's better to register sooner than later. As we mentioned, even if a student registers their first semester, they don't have to use their accommodations or notify their instructors. It's really going to be up to them. They could wait till their second or even their third semester if they want to, to get those accommodations.
Someone wanted to know, is there transportation assistance for wheelchair dependent students to get from building to building? Again, I believe that would be dependent on the campus. At our campus, there is not any type of transportation assistance. We have a bus loop, but it's merely to pick students up on campus and to go off campus.
Yeah, I would say that most campuses do not offer that kind of assistance, as that's really a personal service. But it depends. So I know in some instances that may be necessary if like the campus has multiple campuses geographically. But like Lauren said, a lot of those campuses have bus transportation systems that may be wheelchair accessible. And so, you know, you could use those like any other student.
FIT is only one city block, so if that makes any difference.
Oh, if a student needs a coach to meet with on a regular basis to ensure they're keeping up with assignments, does the school offer these services free or paid?
Again, I think that goes back to the school. Some may offer that. We offer limited assistance in my office at FIT for students who may need some of that type of help. So again, it's really up to the school and what the resources they have available for the students. Again, reaching out to the schools that you're interested in is the most important step in that.
Like,
Yeah,
for
I
example,
think that's
in our learning center, where it's tutoring, they offer time management support and organization, but that would generally be with peer-based tutors.
I know we're a little bit after 4. I'm not sure, Tim and Michaela, if you want to send us the questions or have folks contact us individually.
Yeah, they said they can supply us with the questions, so I suppose we can answer the ones that we haven't and then send them out.
Okay,
Yeah,
whatever.
Okay.
And I'm fine with still going on if people want to,
Okay.
if people are still hanging out.
I'm trying to pick some that are a little multiple day testing, so limiting to 3.5 hours a day. A student had been approved for that for college AP exams. With documentation, would this be allowed in college? I think that just depends on the interactive review process with the disability office and speaking more about the barriers, etc. You guys? How are students' accommodations communicated to their professors once they have been approved?
Well, at FIT, we send out an electronic email to the professors because we used to use a paper form that the student would give to the instructors. And we found that the students were not giving it to the instructors. They weren't comfortable with that process, even though we review that with them. So we went to an electronic document that gets sent to each of the faculty members.
Okay, and we have to end by 4:10. So do you have to keep registering for testing accommodations every semester? So at our campus, there is a renewal process, and we have an online system, so the student can log in. It's a couple clicks. We send reminders on how to do it, but you do have to renew your accommodations to indicate what faculty and what accommodations you need and what faculty should be notified.
Yeah, I think that's important that students understand that because oftentimes they forget and then they're going to need to use their accommodations and they're not set up. So it's important that they understand that step, that they have to renew their accommodations each semester.
Maybe we should end there because it's about time.
Okay. Yeah, I think an important takeaway from today's presentation is to reach out to the individual campuses that you're interested in and see how they do their process and what's available on campus. So thank you so much for your time. Our contact information is on the slide, and we wish you the best of luck in your endeavors and hope that you come to one of our campuses.